All right, everyone, welcome to another amazing, it's going to be amazing podcast, this time for American Contingency. I'm Kevin Estela with Fieldcraft Survival, and today I am joined by a female counterpart, Miss Amber. Is that how you want to be known, or Jolie Blonde, or what are we going with now?
No, I rebranded.
You were rebranded, so how can people find you? Let's get this out of the way now so we don't have to do it later, but we'll probably do it later.
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on Instagram at ms.amber.elle, E-L-L-E. And then you can find a lot of my content at Fieldcraft and on the Fieldcraft Locals page. That's about it.
That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
You say that's about it, but for those of you that don't know Amber, I will tell you that if you are a fan of Instagram and you're constantly on Instagram and you're going through your stories and you get to Amber's story, you're going to see about 30 videos back to back to back to back to back. Amber is really, really good about updating and telling a lot of information. Very, very informative. I don't like using the term character. I'll say persona on Instagram. So welcome.
Thank you.
And how do you like Utah so far?
I've been to Utah a dozen times. It's an incredible state.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing. There's so many different geographical features to really appreciate, and it's obviously in stark contrast to where I'm from. I mean, except for this week.
Right.
Because the South is frozen. But it's just a nice change of scenery. The mountains are so refreshing.
And now, back home where you're from, you have 1, 2, 3 kids?
3 kids.
3 kids. So what lesson, because I know the big focus of today's discussion is all about like the state of current affairs with education. What are you going to bring home, because you homeschool your kids? What are you going to bring home from this Utah experience to your kids that they won't find, say, in a public school, or they won't get from a teacher who hasn't been out here? Like what's going to be the authentic learning experience for them?
We'll probably have a lot of discussions, especially since they've been living they're back home, and we haven't seen the temperatures that they're seeing in over 80 years. So it's been generations since we've experienced this type of cold. And so our conversations are probably going to have to deal with the difference in cold that they're experiencing versus the difference in cold in the mountain. And that's going to lead to a lot of topic on climate and weather. You know, everything just kind of rolls really organically when you're homeschooling.
Right, as opposed to being very forced, very regimented. For the listeners who may not know, before I signed on with Fieldcraft Survival, I spent 14 years and August, September, October, 14 years and 3 months working as a public high school history teacher. So I can tell you now, as someone who's outside of the school system, some of the inner workings of public school and how things work without having to worry about losing my job. So I can tell you, what you can do is in the moment talk about something that's very relevant, as opposed to a teacher that is forced to work with like a pacing guide. I mean, of course, there's still some flexibility with teaching. I can't knock the career that much, but I will tell you that if we're covering, say, like, I'm not a science teacher, but let's say that climate is covered in March, we really can't dedicate too much time to it now in February because we have to stay on track. So that's one of the benefits of homeschooling is if something is piquing your kid's interest, you get to talk about it right away, as opposed to me saying, oh, Amber, honey, I really want to teach you that, but we got to wait like until we get past this unit on the water cycle. Is that okay? And meanwhile, your interest in it just disappears.
For sure. Well, that's the nature of the beast when you have so many children integrated in this system. And so it has to be very regimented, the beginning of school came from, it was very much during the industrial age. So it's like a factory line of education. And that's how it has to be with that many children for the most part.
And when schooling was originally broken down into grades and they said that it was compulsory education, that was to prevent the kids from being forced to work in the factories. Now, I think it's kind of hilarious. I love the fact that homeschoolers, like, you get to tell your kids, we're not doing this unless you do that. Like, I could never, as a teacher, force work on kids, but if, like, I can imagine for you, like, you get to tell the kids, you're taking out the trash, you're doing the dishes, and then we're getting to this, like, you get to play the boss and the teacher all at once. I mean, what are some of the proven things that you found as a homeschooler? Because I wasn't homeschooled, but I've dealt with a lot of homeschoolers over my years, and and some are very successful, and then some just they fail miserably. What have you found for those who are listening? Like, what would you recommend for them to do with their homeschooled kids? Like, what are some successful strategies?
I think the first step you have to do is you have to redeem education for yourself as an adult, and you have to get yourself out of that mindset of the legalistic checklist that education looks like. And you really have to, as a nurturer and as the parent, open yourself up to understand your child in a way that you wouldn't have before. You really need to lean into their unique capabilities and what they're drawn to, the way they learn, what their frustrations are. Because I can see it in my children, how they'll thrive in learning and how they just have a joy in learning. But if I were to have pushed them in a way that felt good for me, and I know a lot of people think that, well, I'm the parent, I get to choose. It's a relationship. School is a relationship, and your children need to have a say in it. And obviously, you want to be structured in some sense, just to make sure that you are, they're expecting a rhythm in life, because children really thrive on that, on the routine and the rhythm and the consistency. You want to consistently be moving forward, but the way that looks is going to be different for every child, and it may not be what you imagined as a parent. It's humbling. You have to humble yourself.
How old are your kids?
8, 6, and 3.
Okay, so none of them hit puberty yet.
No.
Now, this is the $1 million question, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this, and I will take no offense whatsoever if it's more of a reason that you want to keep them home as opposed to send them away. Why homeschool?
I want to control what my children are learning. I want to be able to cultivate their minds. I want to be able to steer their hearts in the direction that I want them to go on a daily basis. And that goes a lot deeper than just what they're learning. If I were to put them into the school system, they would just be integrated into a classroom where, you know what, they'd probably be okay because they're very social children. They love friends. But I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be there to walk them through the really tricky situations. I wouldn't be there to help them whenever they're struggling with a concept when it comes to ELA. I wouldn't be there to nurture them in the way that only I can because I'm their mom and they were given to me. And so it's just not really an option for me to do it any other way. And I see the fruit every single day. And honestly, preparedness, homesteading, everything we do, it's all woven together with learning. And so to imagine compartmentalizing that, where they go to school and then they come home and then we have to pick up in all those different various areas, is it possible? Yes. And I understand that some people don't have the option and that's what they have to do. It's possible, but it's just not the way I want. It's not the way I feel called to raise them.
And as a homeschooler, you get to choose what filter your kids get to see different topics through. I can tell you, as someone who spent a lot of years teaching American history, teaching world history, teaching various courses that, they broached some pretty sensitive topics, I had to kind of play both sides. And the kids would always say, well, Mr. Estela, how do you feel? And I would just smile at them and say, I don't want to tell you how I feel. If you guys know me well enough, you probably can get an idea of how I feel, but I want you to decide on your own. I want you to be able to formulate your own opinion. I think it's really important for kids to do that. And unfortunately, there are absolutely teachers out there that want to create like miniature clones of the way they think in the way that their kids think, the way that their students think. So that decision, like your explanation of why you homeschool, is right in lockstep with so many parents that I've encountered. The big question becomes, when do you say to them, hey, you're too old for homeschooling? Or what happens? Like, how will you approach it if your 8-year-old says, hey, when I'm 12, I don't want to be homeschooled anymore? Like what would that look like?
I think that it would just have to be an open and honest conversation. And I respect her mind and I respect the way she thinks because I've taught her to be that way. And so I would have the conversation and I'd want to understand what her rationale was for it, what she felt like was missing. If there was a way that we could change up our normal routine, that would please her in a way that she felt like there was a void for some reason. And we would include her in that conversation.
Right. I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot too in public education. A lot of parents make decisions for their kids without any say, or any input from the kids. And the kids end up resenting parents. I've seen that play out over the course of 4 years in high schools, where the kid freshman year wants to do something, the parent says something the other way. And over the next 4 years, as I see the kids through the hall, I still can tell like that there's a resentment, where I talk to the kid and they're like, Mr. Estela, I'm sorry that you had to deal with my mom. Like, she always does that to me. And it's like, I wouldn't, if I were a parent, I wouldn't want my child talking about me the way that they were talking to me as a teacher about them at home. I think there's a benefit for homeschooling. I think it's very difficult. I admire what you do, because I know if I were to try to teach math to a kid, even one kid, I would probably end up getting taught by the kid instead. I mean, where they've gone with Common Core, have you gone that direction with math, or have you gone the old school way of multiplication tables and whatnot?
Yeah. I mean, I use a classical curriculum for the most part, so yeah.
Yeah, Common Core and the new mathematics that's out there, I understand where it comes from, right? It teaches kids to visualize things in their head, to think of numbers in different ways, but there's something to be said about old school ways of teaching. Have your kids learned how to write in cursive yet?
We haven't started cursive. Some curriculums do start pretty early. I personally just wanted to get, my oldest will start next year.
That's
really
excellent.
wanted to solidify her handwriting and her confidence in her handwriting before we moved on to the cursive. And I know there's arguments on both sides of it, but that's the beauty of homeschool. You have a brain and you get to use it and you get to decide what works best for your kids.
Right. And another beauty of homeschool, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, is as the teacher, as the parent, you can be armed. When Amber came in here today, she said to me, she goes, "Oh my God, it looks like I'm printing." And I'm like, "Amber, you're in Utah. It's okay." That was something that always bothered me as a teacher, was the discussion about arming teachers, right? They always said, well, we don't want every teacher with a gun. And it's like, you're not giving every single teacher a gun. You're giving the teachers who volunteer for it, who would get qualified. You run it like the Air Marshal program, right? Where you don't know who the teacher is that has a gun. Quite frankly, I don't want the elderly, teacher in the basement who has a hard time seeing carrying a pistol on them, because they won't be able to tell where their front sights are. But I would certainly want, say, one of my, former colleagues was a colonel in the military. I was like, he absolutely should have a firearm on him. So you get to play Mama Bear in addition to, the all-knowing owl, the school
Absolutely.
teacher owl.
And that all comes into play. And when you live the life that I do, you feel very impassioned by everything that you're part of, whether that's like nutrition and diet. It's huge. It's a huge passion of mine. Growing our own food, the way we interact on the farm with the vegetation and the animals. And they're so impressionable for so long. And it's my job to nurture that. And I can, so why not? I have the ability to. My heart goes out to people that don't have the ability to, or the people who can't emotionally, mentally, physically, they just can't handle it. I absolutely honor that in people. It's not an option for everybody, but it was for me. And so nutrition, like I said, everything gets to be involved in our routine and our rhythm of learning. And I want them to love learning. And that's something that I think we see wrought through society is we're seeing children that are never actually taught how to learn. They're never taught the concept of learning. They memorize, it's rote memorization, and then they're done with that topic and they move on because they've never physically had the experience of it. Or it wasn't fed to them in a way that nourished them in the unique way that they needed to be nourished. But you can't do that in a classroom I went to a very small school, so I'm going to say 30 kids, and you might laugh at me.
That's actually not that far from. Wait, was that your entire class?
I graduated in a class of 27 by the time we graduated, yeah.
Okay, so I came from what was called a Class L school, which means that our graduating class was between 250 and 300 people. Your school probably would have been lumped into what they call like a regional district, where it would have been multiple towns all going to the same high school.
Like a consolidation?
Like a consolidation, which, like, if I were to go back to me being like a 14-year-old boy, which maturity-wise really isn't that difficult all the time. But if I were to go back to me being a 14-year-old boy, and if you were to say, hey, you've got to date the girl that comes from that town way over there, that she's getting bused in 20 or 30 miles, and you're getting bused in 20 or 30 miles, I don't even know how that's possible. So yeah, that's an incredibly tiny school. Very rarely will you be able to find a teacher that can do exactly what you're saying, is showing a kid how to be a student, how to learn. Something that was taught to me in grad school when I was getting certified to teach was, the important thing as a history teacher in particular is not just to teach kids what happened or where things happened, but why did things happen when they did, right? Like what made the conditions ripe for revolution? What made that location the perfect location for a settlement as opposed to other locations? So I think that's very difficult for a lot of kids to process, like, especially with history, they say it's just dead, right? Like, why do we need to learn about things that happened 20 years ago? And I always tell the kids, because concepts are cyclical. They come around over and over and over. And I said, if you study the past, you're able to, I don't like saying predict the future, but it's the closest thing to kind of getting an idea of when things are going to happen. But it's not easy to do, because sometimes with 30-something kids, in the typical classroom today, just to give the listeners an idea, at the beginning of the school year, your average teacher is going to be given a list of students that are on the special education curriculum, right? Like not curriculum, but special education line of studies, where they have various special education needs. On top of that, those teachers are given 504 recommendations. And the 504 recommendations could be for, say, like the kid who was jet skiing over the summer. They broke both of their legs in like a tragic accident with manatee or something. I'm totally making this up, by the way. I never actually had a kid that broke both of his legs with a manatee. But let's say that the kid is in a wheelchair. So that 504 plan will accommodate that child. So I feel for a lot of the teachers that are out there today, because if they don't provide those accommodations, they are legally liable, and they can be sued. And people are like, oh, teachers, you guys have it easy. You only work part of the year. And I have to laugh at that one, because the average teacher, they go home and they're grading papers. Many times those teachers are grading papers with a glass of wine. Yeah, that does happen, or their favorite craft beer, but they're working ridiculous hours every single week. So,
and I'm sure you have that emotional connection to these kids constantly over and over again.
Yeah, and that's something as a former teacher, I will tell you, I miss that aspect of the job. I have a box at home. Every single year I was a teacher, I would keep feedback from students, and when kids say things like, you're the most positive role model I've ever had. Or when a parent comes in and says, my daughter lost her dad at a young age. She has never trusted men until she met you. And the parents are crying. Or the mom is crying. Like that type of thing, I would go back to teaching in a heartbeat if it was like that every single day, but it's not. Unfortunately, we're told to do things a certain way. We're given curriculum that we're told that we have to teach it, and if we don't get to it, then our livelihood is at stake. So in many respects, there are public education teachers that envy homeschooled parents, because we wish we could have as much flexibility as you do.
And I know that varies state by state, but it is something that matters so much to me, and I feel very called to be a parent in this season of life in every sense of the word. And so if that would have involved, if we were a 2-income family, we are, but like if mine started out as a hobby, so my husband's income has always just been the base income for our family. If it would have been different than that, if I would have been working in the hospital, because I am a registered nurse, and I would have had to step back from a career, and that meant changing homes, changing vehicles, changing states, even if the regulations were so intense, it's something I would have absolutely done, because that's how called I felt to that for this season of life. It's such a short season.
So you're also the school nurse then?
Absolutely.
Have you ever thought of yourself as that too?
100%. I have many titles that I declare over myself in my home.
When you were a kid, did you ever have to go to the school nurse and have your hair looked through like every other kid with the toothpicks?
I didn't. I never had lice as a child.
No, I'm not saying you had lice, but I'm saying...
No, they
did you have
never
to-
did that.
They never did that?
No.
Oh my God, that was probably one of the most humiliating things that every kid had to go through when I went to school. You know, they've got those little tongue depressors, toothpicks, whatever, and they're like, yep, no nits here. But something...
Such a terrible word.
Nits is nasty. It's almost as bad as the word moist. Some people hate that word. I actually well, that's another story.
I like all words.
I'll share a funny story that maybe won't be appropriate for the air after we get off this podcast. Now, something that's kind of like a bread and butter, no pun intended, element of all schooling is a school lunch. How the hell do you do it where you're teaching the kids and lunch comes up? Now, during lunchtime, like we took sea lunch, 11:37, I send the kids to lunch. I know that they're going to be back around like 12:06. How does that work as a homeschooled parent dealing with lunch?
Yeah, I mean, it takes, for me, if I want to still be in a place where I'm thriving and not overwhelmed, efficiency is important to me. And so I just have to prepare in advance. Even that's as simple as writing down on a Sunday night what I want to cook because I know what's in the fridge or in the freezer. And I just make sure that I'm fitting all the pieces of school around that moment in, lunch or whatever it may be. And so I'll get the bulk of their schoolwork done in the morning. That's what works for us. And then my oldest is 8, and so she does a lot more writing and a lot more reading. And so we'll all go, our schoolroom, we have a big schoolroom upstairs. So we'll all go downstairs and she'll sit at the counter and finish up her work. Or if she's done, they all participate with me. Or I'll send them outside to play and burn off some energy and go make believe and be fairies and princesses and soldiers while mom makes their food and has a moment in the kitchen and gets to sit in some quiet. You know what I mean? It works. It's not ever a pain point for me.
Excellent. Yeah, I recall going through the public education system. I went through parochial school when I was 1st through 8th grade, and then I went to a public high school and decided to go back to a Jesuit college. But I remember in the public high school the experience of the lunchroom, and that's something that it was always something to look forward to every single day. So I think it's important, whether you're in public education, your kids are going through that program, or homeschooling, to build in that type of break, right? Like, I'm a firm believer in the 7 habits of highly effective people. One of them is sharpen the saw. And whether they're going out and, like you said, blowing off steam, casting magic fairy spells on one another, or playing Fortress or whatever, or you're just going to the cafeteria to, if you're that kid, hang out with your friends, watch the crazy kid eat, as many French fries as possible in a short amount of time, whatever it may be. Like, you have to build in that playtime, or else you can never expect any work time out of them afterwards. Right?
Oh yeah, I believe in an intense amount of playtime. Like, my curriculum is very much created around that concept. My children are outside for at least 3 to 5 hours a day, and sometimes I feel like that's not enough. But it's incredible how much that impacts a child.
And do the hours that you have your kids working on their schoolwork, do they kind of reflect the traditional school day, like 7 to 2, 8 to 3, that type of thing? Or is it a longer day and, say, like shorter school year, so to speak? Or
it really only takes us a couple of hours. As they get older, the writing and the reading comprehension and all of these different things will increase. But honestly, for a 6-year-old, like, their capacity to retain and to be actively engaged in the learning process, 30 to 45 minutes at max,
Right.
And I involve a lot of tactile components, sensory bends. I know how to lean into the things he likes to lean into. And so there's a lot of play involved in his learning, but he loves to learn. He will wake me up sometimes in the morning at 5 o'clock and say, "Can we do schoolwork before the girls wake up?" Like, he wants to. And he's such an adventurous kid, and the fact that he still finds joy in learning tells me that something's going right,
Right.
So I do school in the morning because of what I understand from my children specifically. I know that that's their peak ability to maintain mentally. And sometimes I let them play before we get started. If they're up early enough and it's pretty outside, They get to go run out and they get to use their imagination, and then they come back in, we regroup, we get their schoolwork done for the day, and then they go play. But being that I'm facilitating their learning, I know exactly what they're learning. I know exactly what concepts they might be having a little bit of a tricky time with. And so when I go, once I'm done with whatever I'm doing in the afternoon, and I go out to meet them to join them in play, I can integrate that into their play. Or we can go over a science concept in a way that's relevant to them and the world they live in. And so it becomes a very real thing to them, and it's something that they just don't forget.
Yeah, and something that I'm very envious and jealous about your situation is our budget every single year got cut more and more and more, right? And what a lot of people don't understand is that our standardized testing was so closely linked to how much money we received as a district. And if our school didn't show what was called AYP, we talked about acronyms earlier. If our school didn't show AYP, which was adequate yearly progress, then we could go on probation essentially with the state, and the state would hold back money.
You got punished.
We got punished, right? And if we could finagle the numbers, which I'm not saying my school did that, but I'm saying many schools, they get called out all the time. Many schools would get called out for finagling numbers, and then what would happen is the school would, if they could get away with it, they would receive more money for making it look like they were, achieving this. But meanwhile, the kids are suffering. But something that was an adverse effect of that was any additional money for like true field trips. And I'm not talking like the field trip where you're going to an area for like 5 minutes and you're just going, to screw around. But some of the true academic field trips to historic places in New England got completely cut. So I'm super jealous and envious that as a homeschooled parent, you can take your kids on quote unquote field trips wherever the curriculum that you present them dictates. Mm-hmm. So, do you have any cool field trips planned?
Yeah, it's lovely to have absolute freedom in that. My oldest is very interested in the colonial period of American history right now. And so I plan to take her up to Colonial Williamsburg as soon as the weather's a little better and it'd be easier to navigate the area.
And now you don't have any snow days either.
No snow days.
Yeah. So I feel bad for the
last
homeschool
week,
kids in that respect.
My kids are getting a break this week, but because mom's gone, so they got to fully enjoy the snow. But they did a few science projects with the grandparents. They sent me some videos of, so that's cute. And that's another thing, is integrating your family into it, And we do a lot of, my father-in-law was an Eagle Scout, and he takes that very seriously. And I told you, our family has a large farm. And so some afternoons after lunch, we'll go out to the farm. He's retired now, and we'll do knots for 30 minutes with him, or we'll go out into the woods and he'll show them what to gather to build a fire. And so and as we're out there, we're talking about, let's look at the different leaves and the edges of the leaves. Remember, we talked about how some leaves have serrated edges. And so it's just like, it comes to life. Imagine an education that's living.
Well, compared to the education that most kids have right now, which is distance learning,
I know.
I really feel terribly for them.
It's heartbreaking.
Having that sense of community that you mentioned, that's one of our pillars of preparedness that we talk about at Fieldcraft. Having community. I'm sure you have a network of other homeschooled children that your kids can associate with. But I can't even compare what it's like right now for these kids who, if you've never seen a Zoom call with these kids on distance learning programs, most of the time the kids turn their computer screen up so you just see the top of their head. Most of the time, these kids are watching television over the top of the computer screen. There's so many hacks that came out, not to mention the entire education system around the country got caught with their pants down when it came to switching over to distance learning. Granted, there was a lot of learning, leaps and bounds learning in order to get caught up to what other countries around the world are capable of doing. But there were many teachers that failed early on. There were some that were very creative early on, and certain subjects were a lot easier to teach over an online platform than others. But I think one thing that most people are forgetting, and I saw it this year, and this is one of the reasons why I was like, I'm totally fine walking away, is that these kids from February until September when they came back, they weren't socializing with anyone really. And when you would speak to them, they would talk to you like this, where they didn't even want to look you in the face, or they'd talk down. There was no eye contact whatsoever. I really think that anyone that's listening right now who has a kid at home, distance learning, you need to find a way to get your kids around other kids. I don't care if they're neighborhood kids. I don't care if you are going with other families somewhere, but teach them to socialize with one another, because I think we're actually taking a big step backwards.
Absolutely. It's very comical because so much of the conversation around homeschooling and the controversy around it always starts with the socialization aspect.
Absolutely.
They're going to be weird.
Oh, I've met some weird ones. There's no doubt about that.
I'm weird. Like, aren't we all supposed to be a little weird in our own way? I have eccentricities. I am very interested in things the average person isn't interested in. I love learning. I have 500 books and probably 4 DVDs in my home. Like, that's just what's valuable to me. And I'm okay if someone calls my kids weird. They know how to speak to an adult. Another thing is, I don't have to implement technology in a way other people want to implement it. I get to choose that. We have no screens in our home, like tablets and things like that. My children do not operate tablets. Can they? Look at the generation they come from.
Right.
They're extremely capable of it. When it comes time for them to do it, and I know that mentally it's a safe time, I mean, you can look at the studies about how it rewires a child's actual brain when they're looking at the spectrum and the bands of light that are coming from a tablet.
The blue light.
And they're not actually having to use certain parts of their brain. And so they lose some of those synapses, and that's scary. So being able to make a choice about when I'm going to introduce that, when it's safe for them, and when I'm able to monitor it and make sure that they're navigating the webs safely, because it's a dangerous place.
Yeah.
And they can't unsee what they see. They are so much more imaginative. They are very creative. And I didn't think I would see it this quickly, but I see other 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds that are my children's age that are so handicapped and paralyzed in that area already. And that goes into play to affect even situational awareness.
Right.
When I'm driving down the road with my children, they'll recognize my dad's truck from 3 lanes away, driving through town. That's not normal for children to be able to do that, because they're very much caught up in what's right in front of their face and not what's happening around them.
One of the fun things that I used to do, because I don't know what kind of reputation you want to say that I had at the school. I mean, kids said that I was an interesting teacher. I had a lot of fun with them.
Are you weird too, Kevin?
I have my weird moments. My students used to call me the mama bird, because they were like, you just feed us information like we're this kid Patrick, great kid. If you're listening, Patrick, I appreciate you for coining me the mama bird. He's like, you feed us all this information like we're a bunch of like hungry little birds, like hungry for all this like gruesome Spanish Inquisition knowledge. I'm like, it's just fun for me to share it, So I was the mama bird, and I had all these baby birds. But one of the things I used to do, I used to have a giant paper box, and that was my hallway pass. So it actually encouraged kids not to use the bathroom to go see their friends or go make out with their girlfriend or boyfriend at the water fountain, because they didn't want to walk through the halls with this giant, obnoxious yellow box that actually had bells in it. I swear to God, it actually made noise when you walked with it. But one of the other things that I did was getting to the situational awareness, and I knew I would come back to it. The coffee finally kicked in. Was when kids are walking down the hall, I can't tell you how many times they're walking down the hall and they've got their head in their phone like this.
They have phones in school?
Oh, I'll get there.
Oh my God.
And I would just put my fingers out in front of them, and as they would walk by me right in front of their face, I'd snap my fingers, and they could be like, "Oh my gosh!" I'm like, I had my arm out the whole time, and I would tell them, you don't need to be in your phone when you're moving, right? Mm-hmm. We're most vulnerable when we move. That's a concept everyone that's listening should listen to. We're most vulnerable in movement, and that's something that these kids didn't realize. But yeah, they have their phones in school. Some school systems have what they call BYOD, bring your own device, where they understand, and this is something that came out during distance learning, they could not initially supply every kid with a laptop, Chromebook, whatever. So they said, we're going to triage this. And if a kid has a cell phone, well, guess what? They can do the work on the cell phone, but the kid with no device gets the laptop. Well, that creates an equity issue, because it's certainly not the same to do work on a cell phone as it is to have a full keyboard in front of you, that type of thing. But I mean, we could go on and on and on and on and on about like the current state of education, but let's just say this. It's in crisis mode right now.
Absolutely. It's just going to get worse.
Yeah. As someone who came from public education, I will tell you, if there ever were a time to pull your kids for a year and do it on your own, and this is if you're capable, right? I mean, we understand that there are certain jobs that you're not going to be able to do this, but if you have the means and you have the ability, I would 100% not. I would 100% recommend that you consider it at the very least. Because if you're just sending your kids to school right now saying, well, I don't have to see them for X number of hours, I get to do my own thing, are you really setting them up for success, or are you setting them up for failure? Mm-hmm. So I appreciate people like you. I think this is a valuable conversation, because if we are concerned with community, and if we're concerned about the level of readiness that this country has for future generations, I really feel like they're not going to be as ready as other countries that are truly looking at the whole student and not just the academic student. Mm-hmm. So, do you have any final? I mean, we're running short on time.
I know.
We have another one right after this one.
I have a million things I could say on this, and
then give us your top 5.
Well, and I think it's a hard thing to swallow for some people. I really do, and you don't want to hear that the devices are difficult, because some people will call me antiquated. Like, obviously, yes, I'm a traditionalist. Do I expect everybody to be a traditionalist? No. But when we look at the vulnerability of our children, we have to factor the cost, and we have to think differently than we're trying to be taught to think about it, because it's not okay. And the education system is under attack, and it will be under attack. And it has turned into a political game, whether you want to believe it or not. The facts are there. Facts don't require your approval, right? And our children, they are the future. I mean, they absolutely are. And we need children that are going to grow up to be confident adults. Where is a child going to gain confidence if somebody's not there to pat him on the back and say, excellent job? I mean, it just breaks my heart to think about these children distance learning with very stressed out parents. I get that. I am so sorry you're having to do this. Distance learning is 100 times harder than what I do. It's not homeschool. You are following somebody else's regiment, somebody else's timeline, doing it someone else's way, and you're not connecting with your children. I want my children to feel joy in the learning experience. I want them connecting with one another. Find a cooperative. Like, we're part of a co-op where we meet once a week, and they're with lots of other kids. And they still get to do what kids do and bounce their ideas off of one another and kind of experiment with how far they can push somebody, or how to deal with their own arguments. But I've also created great relationships between my children, because they're not so distracted by outside things. And I'm there to redirect the conversation. So I have taught them to encourage one another, and to not view frustration in a little brother or a big sister, not to view that frustration as something negative, but something to overcome and a way to love people deeper. And so they enjoy playing with each other. And it's just building connection within your family. Find a way to get involved with other families. It's not necessarily something you have to do all by yourself. But if you're feeling that tug in your gut, like there's maybe another way for your family, I would encourage you to listen to that tug.
Yeah, and just to wrap up, something that you said really struck a chord with me. I like the idea of challenging them, right? Mm-hmm. As a teacher, I would always make it a point to pressure test my students. If they said something, even if I completely disagreed with it, right? If a student said to me, well, I believe, so this is my favorite one. If a student said, I think everyone should have guns, right? Here comes the guns topic again. I would say, everyone? And I would start questioning them, give them a couple questions of scrutiny, and just see how they react.
Like the Socratic method.
I love doing that. And I actually got called on it a few times.
Really?
Parents complained. They're like, you were intimidating my child. I'm like, intimidation?
I was teaching your child to think.
And meanwhile, hear what I just said? Intimidation? Like, I'm asking them the same thing back.
Define that for me.
Exactly, right. Are you feeling intimidated now? And that was something that I was really frustrated, because some of my best teachers pressured me. I feel that in life you need pressure to grow. But that's something that you said that's incredibly important. So with that being said, guys, I want to pressure all of you to encourage your children to do more, right? Find a book that you enjoyed and read with them. Super important. Find an experience that you can share with them. Have your child teach something to you, and tap into the resources of your community, right? There are a bunch of retired teachers that are probably listening. There are a bunch of college students looking for something to do that looks great on the resume, that would be fantastic tutors, and really build up your community, because education is power. So Amber, thank you so much. I'm not going to bang on this table because it's going to destroy the microphone. So I'm just going to pretend that I banged on the table. And, once again, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at ms.amber.elle, E-L-L-E, and you can find my family readiness or family preparedness content at Fieldcraft.
Awesome. All right, guys, that's about it. So with that being said, God bless America, and stay prepared out there.